Shalom, Shaul Dog here once again with your weekly drash. And we are all the way to Parashah number 27. This is Tazria. This is chapter 12, verse 1 to chapter 13, verse 59. And then we have a twofer here. We have Parashah 28 also, which is Mitzorah, which means person afflicted with Zarat. And that is chapter 14, verse 1 through chapter 15, verse 33. Zaria means she conceives. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. But anyways, we're going to cover, a lot of this has to do with leprosy, okay? Leprosy is not really a big problem here, where we're at. It's pretty much been annihilated around the world. I mean, there are still some isolated cases, but for the most part, that's what it deals with and how to deal with the leprosy and everything. Well, there's also some other stuff here, too, okay, that have to deal with our everyday lives. So that's what I want to get into. And also, I got a little bit of the Parashah in here also, just to make a point, too. So let's just get right into it, okay? Yahweh said to Moshe, tell the people of Israel, if a woman conceives and gives birth to a boy, she will be unclean for 7 days, with the same uncleanliness as a nida. That's the menstrual cycle or the period. When she's having her menstrual period, okay, I should have just read on. On the 8th day, the baby's foreskin is to be circumcised. She is to wait an additional 33 days to be purified from her blood. She is not to touch any holy thing or come into the sanctuary until the time of her purification is over. But if she gives birth to a girl, she will be unclean for 2 weeks, as in her nida. And she is to wait another 66 days to be purified from her blood. When the days of her purification are over, whether for a son or a daughter, she is to bring a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering and a young pigeon or dove for a sin offering to the entrance of the tent of meeting, to the Kohen. He will offer it before Yahweh and make atonement for her. Thus she will be purified from her discharge of blood. Such is the law for a woman who gives birth, whether to a boy or to a girl. If she cannot afford a lamb, she is to take 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, the one for a burnt offering and the other for a sin offering. The Kohen will make atonement for her, and she will be clean. Okay, basically that's cut and dry. Why longer for a girl than for a boy? I would think it's because Eve was the first to eat the fruit, and she's the one who deceived her husband into eating the fruit on the forbidden tree. So I would think that would have some kind of bearing on it. Now, we get into the Parashah here, and, for all you people who have a Greek mindset and who believe the Messiah was some toga-wearing guy with, vines in his hair and everything else, walking around hugging people and giving kisses and everything. And, if you think he established a Christian church, well, you might want to hear this. This is Luke chapter 2, verses 11 through 24. This very day in the town of David, there was born for you a deliverer who is the Messiah, the Son of Yah. Here is how you'll know. You'll find a baby wrapped in a cloth and lying in a feeding trough. Suddenly, along with the angel, a vast army from heaven was praising Yah in the highest of heaven. Glory to Yah, and on earth, peace among people of good will. No sooner had the angels left him and gone back into heaven than the shepherds said to one another, let's go over to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, that Yahweh has told us about. Hurrying off, they came and found Miriam and Joseph and the baby lying in the feeding trough. They weren't all in the feeding trough. Okay, it was just a baby. Well, the way the way it's worded, they found Miriam and Joseph and the baby lying in the feeding trough. Sorry, it's just the way it's worded. Okay, let's continue. Upon seeing this, they made known what they had been told about this child. And all who heard were amazed by what the shepherds said to them. Miriam treasured all these things and kept mulling them over in her heart. Meanwhile, the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising Yah for everything they had heard and seen. It had been just as they had been told. On the 8th day, when it was time for his Brit Milah, he was given the name Emmanuel, which is what the angel had called him before conception and what the prophecy said his name would be in Isaiah 7:14. I just added that part. But the time came for their purification according to the Torah of Moshe. They took him up to Jerusalem to present him to Yahweh, as it is written in the Torah of Yah, as we just covered here. Okay? Every firstborn male is to be consecrated to Yahweh, and also to offer a sacrifice of a pair of doves or 2 young pigeons as required by the Torah of Yah. Okay, this is if they could not afford a lamb. Okay, let's go into here. Okay, now see, to bring a lamb in its first year for a burnt offering, she gave birth to the lamb. Okay? She gave birth to the lamb. She gave 2 pigeons. Okay? They were also not at home. Okay? They were on the road. They had to make a little journey so they could be counted with the census also, which means what they had with them was limited. You know, you don't take all of your money with you when you go on vacation or when you go here or there. No, you just take what you need. So at the time, the people are trying to say that they were very poor. Well, they might not have been very poor, but I believe they were middle class. They weren't, highly wealthy and everything like that. But I know a good carpenter's going to, make some pretty good money after being in the business for well over 25 years. Well, yeah, you make pretty good money as a carpenter. So Yosef, he was a carpenter. If they were dirt poor, then that would mean he's a pretty bad carpenter. So, she did the pair of doves, number one, because that was all put together into one scenario, so she would have to give a pair of doves. And that's because she gave birth to the sacrificial lamb, okay? You see? She offered up the sacrificial lamb already on his 8th day. You see? Offered up to Yah. So, just a little bit of insight here, okay? And then, that's pretty much it from Parashah 27. Okay, so we go into Parashah 28. Like I said, I'm sort of skipping past all that stuff about leprosy and everything. So I just want to stick to what's pertinent to my ministry, okay? And that is everyday walking of the scriptures, okay? When Yah said that you're unclean after birth, then you're unclean. If you're unclean with your nida, then you're unclean with your nida. And you gotta, ladies, you gotta pay attention to this if you want to obey the Torah and do things correctly by the way Yah says, then you need to pay attention to this and take care of business, so to speak. Okay, I know it might be a little embarrassing for you, okay, but now we're getting to the guys part, which is a little bit on the embarrassing side, okay? We're talking about discharges and stuff like that. Yeah, but it's a part of human life, okay? It's a part of how we were built. It's how we were created. So, we have to go over this. And believe me, I do get messages in my inbox all the time about stuff like this, I do. And basically, when you come into a Torah belief and everything like that, and when you come into obedience of the Torah, all this stuff isn't, gross anymore or anything like that. It's more like, okay, well, this is a fact of life. It happens. I want to know how to deal with it according to what the scripture says. So that's basically the level that we're dealing on when I have people messaging me in my inbox about this stuff, okay? I don't have, I have had some perverts, but That's a whole different story. But anyways, we're jumping into Parashah 28, okay? And we're going to go straight to chapter 15. Okay, we're going to start right there. Yahweh said to Moshe and Aharon, tell the people of Yisrael, when a man has a discharge from his body, the discharge is unclean. Okay, now see, this discharge, this is not specifically talking about a seminal discharge, okay? Which means this could be a sneeze, it could be vomit, it could be something, but it's not specifying seminal discharge. Okay, so we need to understand this. Popping a zit or, milking a boil or something like that. Yeah, it's gross, but it does happen, and there's something discharged there. Well, this is for the men here, the guys here. But when a man has a discharge from his body, the discharge is unclean. The discharge is unclean no matter whether it continues flowing or has stopped. It is still his uncleanliness. Every bed which the person with the discharge lies on is unclean. Everything he sits on is unclean. Whoever touches his bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Whoever sits on anything this person with the discharge sat on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Anyone who touches the body of the person with the discharge is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge spits on somebody who is clean, the latter is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Any saddle that the person with the discharge rides on will be unclean. Whoever touches anything that was under him will be unclean until evening. He who carries those things is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. See, it's not a perpetual uncleanliness, like if you're living in total complete sin, but you are unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge fails to rinse his hands in water before touching someone, that person is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. If the person with the discharge touches a clay pot, it must be broken. If he touches a wooden utensil, it must be rinsed in water. When a person with a discharge has become free of it, he is to count 7 days for his purification. Then he is to wash his clothes and bathe his body in running water, living water, mayim chaim, okay? After that, he will be clean. On the 8th day, he is to take for himself 2 doves or 2 young pigeons, come before Yahweh to the entrance of the tent of meeting, and give them to the Kohen. The Kohen is to offer them, the one as a sin offering and the other as a burnt offering. Thus the Kohen will make atonement for him on account of his discharge before Yahweh. Okay, so basically that's about a discharge, maybe a sneeze, throwing up, I believe, whatever kind of discharge. I mean, it's not specific in this scripture here, but if it's a discharge, it's a discharge, right? But N'tilat Yadayim, when the ritual hand washing, wash up to the wrist, and that's like ritual hand washing. It's something the Messiah spoke against a few times, and people have, he said, it's not what goes in your mouth that makes a person unclean, but what comes out of the mouth. Well, that's what a lot of people like to twist around and say, well, you can eat anything you want to now because the Messiah said it was all clean. No. Because if you read earlier in that same thing, if you keep it in context, the Pharisees were saying, why doesn't your Talmudim perform N'tilat Yadayim and wash their hands before they eat? Okay, well, it's obvious since they were Torah-keeping, Torah-observant, obedient Jews that they were eating kosher food, okay? And it was the Pharisees that had an issue with them eating that kosher food with ritually unclean hands, okay? The ritual hand washing, okay? That was the issue that they brought up to the Messiah, okay? And the Messiah basically said, no, because the Pharisees believed that if you didn't ritually wash your hands according to their doctrines and their laws, that whatever you ate would become unclean. Okay? And I believe they got it from this. Okay? From this little bit here. Okay? Because, who has a discharge? I mean, if you sneeze, there's a discharge there, right? So you can see why they do N'tilat Yadayim and they wash their hands, and you know what I mean? And they just continually do that. That's to preserve cleanliness. It makes sense, but it's not specific what discharge this is talking about. Okay? So, that's still up in the air, but nowhere is it commanded to do ritual hand washing. It's blatantly obvious that you should wash your hands if you sneeze or if you go to the bathroom or something like that. It's blatantly obvious you should wash your hands. Okay, because you don't want to be eating all the germs and stuff from that, right? Okay, so, but it's not a command to do that. Okay? So, I could see where they got it from here. Okay? And, what can I say? They're going to keep doing what they're doing. It's not a sin that leads to death, but it is a sin against the Torah of Yah because they're adding to it, you see? I can't say that it's a sin that leads to death because they're adding to it, because they didn't write it. They didn't take the Torah and say, okay, let's insert this and this and this into it. You see what I'm saying? I mean, it's up in the air. I mean, if you wash your hands after you go to the bathroom or after you sneeze or you cough or something like that, are you actually going against the Torah? No. Okay, so the actual act, washing your hands, isn't wrong. It's okay to wash your hands. But to make it a law and make it so everybody does it, and to say the Torah says it, well, that's wrong, and that is a sin that leads to death. I hope I'm making sense here. The act of washing your hands is not a sin. But to say the Torah says to do it, okay, as a ritual, that is a sin. Okay, hope you get it. But now we get into the fun part here. If a man has a seminal emission, okay, you see, you have a discharge and an emission, okay? And, it specifically talks about a seminal emission here, okay? So, we can see that the two are not related. If a man has a seminal emission, he is to bathe his entire body in water. He will be unclean until evening. Okay, that's it. You're not unclean for, 3 years, 20 years, or whatever. Okay. Any clothing or leather on which there is any semen is to be washed with water. It will be unclean until evening. If a man goes to bed with a woman, has intercourse with her, both are to bathe themselves in water. They will be unclean until evening. If a woman has a discharge and the discharge from her body is blood, she will be in her state of nida for 7 days. Whoever touches her will be unclean until evening. Everything she lies on or sits on in the state of nida will be unclean. Whoever touches her bed is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Whoever touches anything that she sits on is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. As soon as he touches the bed or something she sat on, he will be unclean until evening. If the man goes to bed with her and her menstrual flow touches him, he will be unclean 7 days. And every bed he lies on will be unclean. If a woman has a discharge of blood for many days, not during her period, or if her discharge lasts beyond the normal end of her period, then throughout that time she is having an unclean discharge. She will be as when she is in nida, she is unclean. Every bed she lies on at every time while she's having her discharge will be like for her the bed she used during the time of nida. And everything she sits on will be unclean with the uncleanliness like that time of her nida. Whoever touches those things will be unclean. He is to wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. He will be unclean until evening. Now, let's just stop right there. And that woman that came up to the Messiah, Emmanuel, who had the constant flow and everything like that, who touched his tzitzit, okay, and was healed, well, according to the law, according to the Torah, The Messiah himself was made unclean because she touched him. But was he? Because she was healed when she touched the tzitzit. So when she was healed, that means she wasn't unclean now, right? See? So we can see the Messiah walked a perfect path. No uncleanliness came about him. He was never unclean. Okay? She touched the tzitzit and was healed. Therefore, he remained clean. How cool is that? If she has become free of her discharge, she is to count 7 days. After that, she will be clean. On the 8th day, she is to take for herself 2 doves or 2 young pigeons and bring them to the Kohen at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The Kohen is to offer the one as a sin offering, the other as a burnt offering. Thus, the Kohen will make atonement for her before Yahavah on account of her unclean discharge. In this way, you will separate the people of Israel from their uncleanliness, so that they will not die in a state of uncleanliness for defiling my tabernacle, which is there with them. Such is the law for the person who has a discharge, for the man who has a seminal emission that makes him unclean, for the woman in Nida during her menstrual period, for that person, man or woman, with a discharge, and for the man who has his sexual relations with a woman who is unclean. Okay, so basically that's it in a nutshell. And just seeing how this all, the majority of this, the previous Parashah and this one, it all ran together, had to deal with leprosy. Then he goes on to give these commands of cleanliness. Then we could start to see where leprosy actually starts to manifest and fester itself. You see? When you're running around with that kind of uncleanliness, the kind that was described here, when you're running around with that kind of uncleanliness, then guess what? If you're not in a germ-free environment or whatever, then I believe that leprosy would be a major issue here. And in a lot of third world countries, those isolated incidences of leprosy, that's in some of the slums of the third world countries, some of the poorest areas. Okay, so it does make sense here, how everything like this has come together. It does. But, I know this might have been uncomfortable for you a little bit to listen to, but the fact is, it's scripture. It is how our bodies work. It is how everything was made and put together here. So, men and women have their own things going on, and there's rules for all of us. And one thing I want to bring up here before I wrap this up, you see that there's a rule for women and there's a rule for men. Okay, right here, when it comes to cleanliness and everything else, with the nida and discharge and everything like that. And those are 2 out of the proverbial 613. Okay? A man cannot obey the ones for a woman, and a woman cannot obey the ones for a man. Are you starting to see here? Are you starting to see the fact that, maybe it's not 613? Like I said, I've read the 613. A lot of them are rabbinic laws, like N'tilat Yadayim. It's like, washing your hands, like I said, is okay. There's no sin to washing your hands. But if you make it law and you say it's written in the Torah that you have to wash your hands because there's some kind of, slight reference to washing your hands if you are guilty of having a discharge or something like that, that's a different story because it's not commanded in the Torah. That's a rabbinic thing. So, the 613, it's not really 613, okay? And like I said, there's some for men, there's some for women, different occupations, and everything else, okay? It's basically a cornucopia of rules for a big variety of societal type people, okay? I mean, everybody in our culture, different cultures and stuff like that. Okay, wherever you live in the world, there's something for you. If you're male, female, whatever you do for a living, there's something for you. Okay, but it's not like a ton of laws heaped down on top of you. And like I said, you could go anywhere around the world, and there's millions of laws everywhere you go. But people complain, even if it was 613, people complain about that. They call you a legalist. I'll tell you what, I'd rather be legal than illegal, okay? If you have a problem with being legal, then why don't you stop paying your car insurance, stop paying taxes, and just, do whatever the heck you want. Break whatever law that you want to and everything else. I mean, come on, you're being a legalist if you're obeying the laws of man, aren't you? Well, if you're not, then don't call me a legalist because I choose to obey the laws of my Creator. Okay? As given to the Israelite and the foreigner. Okay? Today's terms, Jew and Gentile. Okay? Pretty simple. It's not hard to obey. Not hard at all. Basically, these things are saying keep clean. You're going to be unclean for this long, but just try to stay clean. That's what it says. Okay? It's not hard. Seek first the kingdom of heaven, all of his righteousness. All these things will be given unto you. Take care. I look forward to the next time.